following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back. Golenbock University. I'm Ralph Tycho of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and Peter helps welcome back a returning guest. 2 weeks ago you were on, and we had him, and thrilled to have you back to talk about literally one of my favorite baseball subjects, certainly my favorite book of all time. Peter, do the introduction, if you will. I'll just say the book, Forever Boys. Thank you again for writing it, Peter.
Well, you're very welcome. I mean, the Forever Boys was, it was some of the happiest times of my entire life.
Let's introduce our guest, our returning guest, Gabriel Schechter.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Our guest is a very, wonderful gentleman, Gabriel Schechter, who is an author in his own right, and we're very happy to have him here on the program. By all means.
Right.
I'm happy to spend some time with you too.
Yeah, well, 2 weeks ago we had an incredibly interesting conversation, and it didn't involve baseball. Can you believe it? It was poker.
It was.
And it was great. So we thought Gabriel was so interested in the book. It turns out you reread the book this past week, Gabriel.
I did. I read it when it came out, which was 1990 or 91, and that's a long time to go by. So I thought I would revisit it, and I was very happy that I did. There's some wonderful stories in there of the individual members of the St. Petersburg Pelicans of the 1989 Senior League, the champions. But the whole story of the season of that team and how the players, many of whom had been discarded by Major League Baseball, had one more chance to play together as a team. And the dynamics of that was fascinating to revisit this week.
It was.
It was a great book for the two of us and many, many more people to read, but a very significant book in Peter's life, I come to find out. And why don't you tell us about that, Peter Golenbock?
Well, I was living in Ridgefield, Connecticut, and on this particular day, I don't know why, but when I went for breakfast downtown in Ridgefield, I bought the USA Today newspaper. And I opened it up to the sports, as I usually did, and the first thing I saw was the little article saying that they were going to start a league, a senior baseball league, similar to senior golf, for retired baseball players older than 35 years old. And I thought to myself, what a fabulous opportunity to spend a season with one of these teams. And I got a really, tremendous contract with the publisher. And I then called Jim Morley. The article said, if you want to play in the league, call Jim Morley. So I called Jim Morley, and I said, this sounds really fantastic. How about letting me spend the season with one of the teams? And he said, great. We're going to have an organizational meeting down in Palm Beach at the Breakers on such and such a date in September. Come on down and attend the meeting. And I did. I flew down to Miami, I guess, and drove up to Palm Beach and sat in at this meeting, and I decided that of all the teams, the team that I really wanted to cover was going to be the West Palm Beach Tropics. It was owned by John Henry, who is now the owner of the Red Sox. Dick Williams, the former manager of Oakland and the Yankees, he was going to be the manager. And the fabulous Mets outfielder who hit all those home runs, Kingman, was going to be the left fielder. And they had a bunch of other players who were just tremendous. And I thought, well, this would be the team that I want to cover. So I put down a deposit on a house to live on Fisher Island, which isn't terribly far from where the West Palm Beach tropics were going to be. And the next day, I get a call from the PR guy from the tropics. Our team doesn't want you. Well, why didn't the team want me? Why didn't the team want me? Because I had just written Personal Fouls, which was a book about North Carolina State basketball, and I had gotten Jim Valvano fired as a result of writing this book. And the guy who was the PR guy for the West Palm Beach Tropics was a friend of Valvano's. So here I have a book contract. I have a book contract, and I don't have a team. And I've got a house on Fisher Island that I'm not going to need. So, of course, the first person I called was Jim Morley. I said, Jim, I've got a problem. These guys, for some reason, decided they don't want me covering their team. So what I didn't realize is that Morley owned the St. Pete Pelicans. And he said, oh, by all means, come to St. Petersburg, and you could spend the season with the St. Pete Pelicans. And I said to myself, fabulous. And I breathed a real sigh of relief there, because this was my book contract that I needed to fulfill. So on October 31st, 1989, I drove from Ridgefield, Connecticut to St. Petersburg, Florida. And I don't know where the hell I'm going, but I got to the last exit before the Sunshine Skyway. I decided I'd better get off. Otherwise, I'd no longer be in St. Petersburg. So I'm driving down the Bayway, and there is the Don Cesar Hotel, and the sun is going down, and it's 82 degrees, and it's just the most gorgeous place I've ever, just what a place. What an absolutely fabulous place this is. And I'm thinking to myself, what the hell am I doing living in Ridgefield, Connecticut when I could be living here? So, the next day, I get in my car and I drive to Huggins Stengel Field, where the team is having its first gathering. A day after, they're going to play their opening game against the Winter Haven Super Sox in Winter Haven. The Winter Haven Super Sox was a Boston Red Sox team, a team entirely filled with Boston Red Sox players. So I get to the clubhouse, and Bobby Tolan, who's the manager, says, I think we have a problem. I said to him, well, what's that? He said, well, the players don't want you around. And I'm sitting and talking with Tolan, and Doc Ellis, the character of characters, I'm sitting in a chair, and Doc is walking around my chair, and he's saying, loser writer, he's taunting me, loser writer. Whoa. So I had to think on my feet, and I said, Bobby, let me do this. Let me go and tell the players what it is I want to do. And when they understand what it is, they'll let me be with their team. And again, Bobby said, okay, fine, go talk to them. And so Bobby goes in with me. He and I walk into the main clubhouse room together, and Bobby says, attention, boys. This guy wants to talk to you. So I proceed to tell them that what I wanted to do was exactly what I wanted to do, which was to write a book about a bunch of ball players who terribly miss the game of baseball and who are having a second opportunity to play the game again. And I tell them this is going to be a book about the love of the game of baseball. And I also, somewhere along the line, I said to them, if any of you want to look and see what I'm writing about you before I publish it, by all means, you're welcome to do so. So I talked to him for about 10 minutes, just blathering away. And at the end of my talk, Bobby says, okay, boys, that's it. and the meeting breaks up, and nobody comes over to me. I have no idea whether I'm in, whether I'm out. So it turns out the next day, the bus is leaving from Miller Huggins Stengel Field at 9 o'clock in the morning to go to Winter Haven. So I got nothing to lose. I show up. You know, I've got my briefcase and my tape recorder and so forth and so on. And I walked on the bus, and I sat down in my seat, and they closed the door, and the St. Pete Pelicans got on the road and headed out to Winter Haven. And it was one of the most marvelous 3 months I have ever spent. It was just fabulous. We had, you know, the thing I've always felt about baseball players is that not only do they have to be talented, but they have to be really, really smart. Because if you're not smart, you can't play this game. And if you have characteristics that are somewhat deviant, they are going to catch up with you. And in fact, during the season, what I found so interesting is that for some of these people, they did. Sammy Stewart, who I love.
Yeah.
Sammy was really just a wonderful, wonderful person. The problem with Sammy was that he was a drug addict. He had an addiction to drugs. And within about the first 2 weeks, Sammy must have borrowed money from every other player on the team. To the point where guys were looking at each other when Sammy came over and they started saying, no, we're not gonna lend you any more money. And Sammy had a real tale of sorrow to tell. I believe he had gotten divorced. My guess he was probably pretty well broke. I mean, this was one chance that he had to, you know, do something that really meant something for him. But unfortunately, his drug addiction was so great that he could not survive the season. And after a couple of weeks, you know, Morley and Bobby Tolan had to let him go. It was very sad. It really was.
Yeah, that was one of the saddest stories in the book.
Yeah.
Beyond belief. Peter, it was what the significance of writing the book went beyond writing the book for you. You did take that dream. You looked at a new place. You saw the weather, the beauty of it all, the relaxation of Florida, all of it.
Oh, yeah.
And you changed your life. You moved to Florida.
Well, I made a trade. I made a trade. I traded the New York metropolitan area for an area where I could play softball 3 times a week. I am playing in my 24th season of the Half Century Softball Club.
Nice.
We play games Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings. 60-game schedule every year. Back then I played a lot of golf. I wasn't very good at it, but we had, you know, dozens of different courses, and that was a lot of fun. Joined the tennis club, played a lot of tennis.
Right.
You know, basically living in Florida is like being at camp.
Summer camp, permanent summer camp, huh?
Yeah, like summer. Yeah, it's been since 1989. I've lived in summer camp. Oh yeah.
California is much the same, Peter.
I'm sure.
Well,
except
gentlemen,
the California is 10 times more expensive.
From 1995 to 2002, I lived in a redwood forest.
Wow.
Just south of Los Gatos, and it was like living in a campground.
Sure.
I had 2 doorways. I could touch a redwood from each doorway.
Wow.
It was fantastic.
Yeah.
It's kind of a charmed feeling, isn't it?
Sure. But we have palm trees. And I rented this house, the house that I'm in right now, from 1990 to 1994. Bought it in 1994, and I enrolled in courses at St. Pete College to study horticulture. and I've probably planted somewhere around 500 flowering bushes and trees and plants on the property here. And I'm living in a jungle. Yeah, I live in a jungle.
That's fantastic.
Amazing. What's amazing about Florida is that they all grow. They do.
Now, Peter, did you take on teaching soon after moving, or
no? No, I started teaching at USF about 8 years ago.
Okay.
One of my closest friends here is the head of the history department, and one of the courses that he taught was sports and American culture. And there reached the point where he didn't want to teach it anymore. He wanted to teach something else. So I have a JD. It's not a PhD, it's a JD that I got from NYU. I have a law degree. And that qualified me, that enabled me to become a professor at USF. And I took over his course, and since then, for the last 8 years, I've been teaching 3 different courses. One is sports and American culture. One is the history of baseball. The third one, which Wednesday is the final exam, is the history of American football.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
You found a new...
Peter, you're never really retired.
Retired? Retired?
You'll
Nobody's retired. Retired? No.
Ralph, writers don't retire because there's nothing to retire from. You're always writing.
No.
No question. No question. You've got the best of all worlds. What would you... I'm going to ask you because I have talked to Peter so much over these last 2 or 3 years, and I'd like to hear, Gabriel Schechter, what you would like to ask Peter about anything, the writing process, anything you'd like to know about Peter Golenbock.
Yes, there is, and it occurred to me over the past couple of weeks since our first talk. Peter, I've interviewed about 30 ex-players, and you've interviewed hundreds. One of the things you told the fellows in that meeting in St. Petersburg was that you would not write about their lives off the field during that season, and that you honored that, but you talked about plenty of unhappy events in the players' careers.
I didn't say that at all. I didn't say that at all. What I said to them is, if they want to, they can see what I'm writing about them before I publish it. I mean, there was nothing off the record about any part of their lives, including their private lives. I mean, I asked a lot of these people very pointed questions about their private lives. I mean, baseball was wonderful, and then baseball ended, and after baseball ended, their lives were not so fabulous. So for them, between the time they retired and the time that the Pelicans existed, I thought was very interesting material. And these people, it took about a week for me to become very, very friendly with Doc Ellis and Tolan and other guys. I mean, we became very close. And so when I interviewed them, there wasn't one of them who ever said to me, I don't want to talk about that. They were so thrilled that somebody cared about them that they were happy to tell me anything I wanted to know.
And that was going to be my question. You did all those books with the Yankees and my question was, how often did you come across something that somebody did not want to talk about or did not want in print? Was it rare? Was it like 1 or 2 things with each guy? I'm sorry.
Rare. It's so rare. For instance, when I did my Red Sox book, I went to the Red Sox fantasy camp, and I spent a week with those people, and it was spectacular. And the only person who gave me any trouble at all was Rico Petrocelli, and he has since regretted it. We've spoken since. But Rico, when he was in the minor leagues, had a manager who really hated him. And I think they hated him probably because Rico was Italian. And one of my first questions, and it was stupid on my part, I should, whenever there's a question and you want, and you know that it's a difficult topic for the person, you take it to the end. You don't start at the beginning. You want to always create a relationship between you and that player before you ask a difficult question. And I made the mistake because it was the minor leagues and I wanted to ask him about this before he got to the major leagues in the chronology. I asked him about this guy, and Rico, who has something of a temper, sort of got mad at me, and he said, I'm not going to answer that, and this interview is over. But that's, 1 out of 400. It's just unbelievably rare.
Can I tell you a story about an interview I did?
Yeah, please do.
And this was a living history story. In the early 90s, I interviewed a lot of guys who had been player reps in the 60s, in Marvin Miller's early years. I wanted to write a book, and I still would like to, about the contract boycott of 1968-69, which I think is overlooked and vital in the history of the Players Association. So the first man I interviewed was Marvin Miller. He was fantastic. And incidentally, he was the only person who asked me, can you turn the tape recorder off for a moment? I do want to say something off the record. And it was understandable. But one fellow he told me about, he said the ideal kind of a player rep was a fellow like Milt Pappas.
Right.
Because if he believed something was right, he didn't care what the fallout was, even if it was on his head. So I interviewed Milt Pappas.
Right.
He was living a little south of Chicago, and took him out for lunch. And we went to a kind of a big diner, and we were sitting in the middle of the room, and very crowded. And Milt was great. I mean, just from the first, he was candid. He had some amazing stories to tell of how people had messed with him and all the trouble he had gotten into, and it culminated in his discussion when I asked him about after Robert Kennedy's assassination, there was trouble in two cities, Houston and Cincinnati, the next day over whether games were going to be played.
Right.
In Houston, the ultimate upshot of it was that Rusty Staub got traded, and in Cincinnati, here's what happened.
Okay.
The Pirates were in town, and Pappas held a meeting a little before the game, and they took a vote that they did not want to play, and they weren't going to play.
Okay.
And he told Dave Bristol, the manager, and Bristol said, you can imagine what Bristol said to him. No, you're going to play. And,
furious, right.
Yeah, so Pappas went over to the visiting clubhouse to tell them, we just voted not to play. Why don't you guys talk it over and take a vote? And they voted, and they weren't going to play either. And fine, he went back, and when he got back, there's Dick Wagner, the GM, berating the team and telling them you're going to play.
Yep.
And Pappas stood up to him in the clubhouse and basically told him, get the hell out of here. Mm-hmm. This is our clubhouse, right? So Wagner took off, and Pappas said, okay, we're going to take another vote. They voted unanimously not to play.
Okay.
And now he's headed back to the visiting clubhouse to tell them what's going on. And I have to tell you, in the restaurant, as he told me the story, he got more and more animated.
I'm sure.
Louder and louder. And by the time he got to this part, he was deep into a flashback. I'm telling you.
Okay.
And he told me, and he's going down, he's in the tunnel between the clubhouses, and there's Dick Wagner, and Wagner intercepts him by grabbing his arm.
Mm-hmm.
and Pappas in the restaurant. He's like, and I said to him, let go of that arm or I'll fucking break yours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And people in the diner were looking at us like, is this guy freaking? Is it, were we having an incident here? He snapped 25 years later just thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. Wow. No, I know. It's the fabulous part of interviewing ball players is that you never ever know somewhere along the line, because stories they want you to know. And even if you don't ask the right questions, for a lot of these people, you end up getting the right answers.
Absolutely.
Wonderful Dodger pitcher, Rex Barney. Rex Barney ended up as the Baltimore Oriole in-game announcer. He was the stadium announcer. So
give that man a contract, huh?
He was a fabulous kid rookie for the Dodgers in the 47, 48, 49, so forth and so on. So I'm interviewing him about Jackie Robinson, and he proceeds to tell me about this game that he was pitching in Cincinnati early in the season, where the Cincinnati fans are booing Jackie. And he proceeds to tell me that Pee Wee Reese, who was the shortstop, who was from Louisville, which was across the river from Cincinnati, walks across the diamond and puts his arm around Jackie's shoulders. And he said, when he did that, you could have heard a pin drop. And I tell you, I was so moved by that story. I never quite forgot it. I wrote a children's book about it that took me 5 years to publish. I ended up getting it published. It was called Teammates. And the thing has been selling since 1992. It sold something like 300.
Oh, yeah.
I know it. But
I have it
like
on my coffee table, and it's in Spanish.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Spanish. Sure.
And I don't even speak Spanish, but it's kind of going off.
That is news to me. That's great.
Yeah.
But the thing about it is you just never know. You don't know what it is you're going to find out when you go and interview these people. And that's what made the whole experience just so, so fair.
And I think one of the things that always comes through when you talk to them is what comes through in your book, which is that they are so acutely aware of their careers in the context of their whole lives. They're so conscious of all the things they had to give up in order to pursue baseball. So much that we can only imagine what it's like to have that much talent and to not be able to do much with it after in the second half of your life. It's got to be such a jolt, and that's the poignance that you bring out in the book.
Well, they say that a ball player dies 2 deaths. The first death that he suffered, and his career is over. And I could see that. We had a couple players who didn't make the team, who came and they tried out. I'm trying to think of his name. He was a fabulous pitcher for the Houston Astros. He was a real star, and then he had a stroke.
Oh,
J.R. Richard.
Yes, J.R. Richard tried out. J.R. Richard tried out for our team. He had a stroke. And nobody really, when the senior league started to play, some people thought that this was going to be a fun league where everybody would have a lot of fun. The Pelicans,
like a beer league.
Like a beer league. The Pelicans built a team to win. Tolan and Jim Morley picked as many young players as they could find so that they would be competitive and win. Whereas some of the other teams, like the Red Sox team, picked guys who were in their 40s. A couple of them were in their 50s for their name value. But the name value, as you know, doesn't win games. And so very quickly, all those teams that had sort of built themselves based on, having fun, discovered very quickly that they didn't win very many games. That they were not. It
wasn't so much fun.
Yeah. Well, losing, as we know, is horrendous. Nobody likes to lose.
There's a lot of scouting on the go. Like, I'm sure Morley was involved in bringing in new players and trying out guys.
No question about that. And I was not privy to the tryout part of it. By the time I got there, the team had pretty well, been picked. And for instance, though, our catcher was a fellow by the name of Butch Benton. Now, listeners probably will have no idea who Butch Benton was, but somewhere along the line,
like me.
He was the absolute number one draft pick of the New York Mets one of the years. And he was supposed to be the cat's meow when it came to pitching. And unfortunately, he got hurt. He never, ever had the career he was supposed to have. But this guy could really catch and hit. I mean, he was one of the stars of this league. And at the season's end, he actually was signed by the Chicago Cubs. And he ended up playing in the minor leagues in AAA for Chicago. Part of the problem for these players was that Major League Baseball did not back the effort. We made the big mistake we made as our commissioner. A great center fielder for the Cardinals.
Right. That brought Kurt Flood.
Center fielder, Kurt Flood. We made the mistake of making Kurt Flood the commissioner of the league. Not we. Morley did. I told him. I said, this is the dumbest thing you could possibly do. And the reason, of course, is that Kurt Flood had sued baseball and was largely responsible for ultimately the end of that clause, the
reserve clause. Reserve clause.
The end of the reserve clause. He was responsible for the end of the reserve clause.
No, he wasn't. No, he wasn't, Peter.
Well,
come on.
Yes, he did. When he started suing baseball.
He started the process, but he lost. He lost that case.
Yes.
He lost his career. I asked Marvin Miller about that, and he said the only tangible connection he could make was that when the lawsuit was pending in 1972, the owners agreed to the arbitration process. They thought if they could stick in their arbitrator, it would forestall lawsuits where the antitrust exemption might be challenged. But that's the only connection that Miller made, I think. And that's not a victory for Kurt Flood.
Yeah, it was not a victory for Kurt Flood, but Marvin was his ear during that entire thing. And Kurt knew he was going to lose, and Kurt told Marvin that he wanted to do it anyway. And that was the first step. You got to Messerschmitt and McNally and you went along, but Kurt Flood was the first step towards that process. And Major League Baseball hated Kurt Flood for that and hated the Senior League because we made him the commissioner. And so when the Cubs made Butch Benton their AAA catcher, they very well would have brought Butch up to play in the majors in September. There's no reason they couldn't have done it. They didn't do it, and in my opinion, they didn't do it because they didn't want a senior league player playing up at the majors, and that was the game because Butch really was a talented. We had fabulously talented people on the St. Pete Pelicans. We really did.
Hey, getting back to Kurt Flood, this was months ago. You mentioned in passing, Peter Golenbock, that Kurt Flood may not have painted the painting.
That's right. Yes, Kurt Flood did not paint his paintings.
Elaborate on that a little bit.
I could elaborate on it. Kurt was one strange dude, and it turned out, God knows why, but that he made a big to-do about the fact that he was an artist and that he painted. But after he died, it turned out he never painted any of his paintings. That somebody else painted the paintings that he took credit for. Very strange, very bizarre. That's all.
That is, because that was happening during his career.
That's right. I know.
This is while he was still playing. This wasn't some later attempt to capitalize on anything.
That's right. But after he moved to Europe, after he left the States and he moved to Paris or wherever the hell he went, Spain or someplace, he contended.
Yeah, Copenhagen.
That's right. Copenhagen. He contended that he was continuing his artist career when in fact he never painted any of those paintings.
That's wild.
I know it. Very, very.
Type of thing you can only get on comfortably zoned radio.
You heard it here first and last.
All right. Hey,
Peter.
With respect for Wendy's time, let's close this off.
Okay.
You are the man, Peter, with 2 Wendy's. My Facebook friend is your sister.
That's right.
She's really terrific.
Yes, she is. Always has.
She's got a great spirit, and she's a Red Sox fan, which
she is. Well, she lives in West Roxbury. She lives up there.
She'd better be.
That's right.
You wrote a book on the Red Sox too. It wasn't just Dynasty that you wrote.
Oh no, I'm very proud of my Red Sox book. Yeah, it started out as Fenway, and then I expanded it and called it Red Sox Nation, and it still does very well.
Okay. Well, all 3 of us are Walter Middies.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
we're all Walter Mitty. No 2 ways about it. Lived my whole life that way.
So, pleasure to be
or as Firesign Theater put it, we're all bozos on this bus.
Fantastic.
Pleasure
Well,
to be on the bus. Pleasure to be on.
This was a lot of fun. Also, before we go, we should point out that the St. Pete Pelicans won the championship that year. In the 1 year of existence, the Pelicans were champs.
Retired undefeated.
They did. They have.
How bad is that?
Not bad at all.
All right. Thank you.
All right. We'll see you all. This is wonderful.
Thank you all for listening to Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, Golenbock University. Gabriel Schechter guested. I'm Ralph Tycho. The weak link of it all. Adios. The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.